Not of that. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next instalment of revision on geography for the AS course. This will be focused primarily on Unit 2 revision, but there will be tips and tricks that you can use for your Unit 1, and then next year if you were to do follow on to the A-level course. As Stephen has said, my name is Mr. Miles Herman and I'm geography teacher at e-sgol Gwyntis Coed, and this unit in particular is the one that I teach in Gwyntis Coed, and I also mark for WJC, so I've got an insight that can hopefully help you towards achieving good grades in these papers. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking primarily on Unit 2, Section A, which is changing places, and we're going to be looking at questions in particular today, because the last session that I did, which is available on the Callum Cymru website, it was focused on content, on changing places, and this now is looking at exam questions and exam technique on the changing places section A. The second half then we'll be looking briefly at Unit 2 Section B. I haven't covered this in the last session, so I will be briefly going over fieldwork, what's to expect in the paper, and what sort of knowledge you need to cover. Now, if you're seeing this and you're thinking, I have no idea what he's talking about fieldwork, we haven't done it yet in class, in school, then it will be upcoming with you. I, for example, in Gwyntis Coed haven't done the fieldwork section yet with my pupils. We've only just finished changing places, so that is to come. So majority of schools probably teach it exactly the same. So yeah, and I'll explain more of the fieldwork and what's to expect later on in the session. So I just thought, before I start, it's a good idea to give you some context. Now, obviously, if you're sort of familiar with this and you know exactly what I'm going to be speaking about, probably if you're watching this pre-recorded and another time and you think, oh, I know exactly what the sort of setup is, but I just think it's a good idea for us just to stop and pause and think, what is the setup, what's expected of us over these 2 units. So the AS qualification is 40% of the A-level qualification. It's comprised of 2 units that you'll sit. Both are examinations, and they'll both be examined this summer if you're to do it, and this year if you're watching it again another time. Then they are always in the summer. They're in May, end of May, beginning of June usually, these 2 exams, about a week apart. Now, the first unit, AS unit, is changing landscapes. This is a 2-hour exam. It's 24% of the qualification and 96 marks in total. Now, section A, changing landscapes, it's either or. So your school, your centre, will have decided whether you do coast or glaciated landscapes. For example, in Gwyntis Coed, we do Rewlifiant, we do glaciated landscapes. So pupils will be able to do that question, they won't be able to do the coasts. But your school might have focused on the coasts, so that's the one that you'll be doing. Tectonic hazards then is section B, which is mandatory, everybody has to complete. The setup, what these are going to look like, well, there's going to be there's going to be a smaller question with a data, figure, a map. There'll be something for you to work on, a sort of describe question, and then maybe like a suggest question or like an explain question. There'll be quite short questions, and then there'll be an 8-mark question, and then there'll be the same thing again. So 2 sort of smaller questions and an 8-mark question, and changing landscapes. And then for section B then, tectonic hazards, this is actually 64 marks. The tectonic hazards section, it's all compulsory, and there are a lot of data response questions where you have to use sources and analyse again with your knowledge. So that's the first examination. The second examination, Unit 2, changing places, it's an hour and a half. It's 16% of the qualification and 64 marks. Now, section 8 is compulsory, changing places, so there'll be a similar setup to the changing landscapes. So there'll be some figure, there'll be a map, a picture, there'll be a graph maybe, and there'll be some sort of describe question or suggest question, and then there may be a smaller explain question. And then there'll be an 8-mark extended question on something you've learned, or you have to revise and show your knowledge. And then again, a data question, data analysis question, an explain question, and then a longer 8-mark question. Section B then is probably that you have something that you haven't even discussed with your teacher yet, which is the fieldwork investigation. We'll be looking at all of this unit 2 today and what questions we could possibly get. And here you'll need obviously you'll do 2 days of fieldwork, physical fieldwork and a human fieldwork. So for example, in Gwentes Coed we go to Brecon Beacons and we look at moraines, and then the human geography we go to Cardiff and we look at the High Street. Now, the setup of this, the first question is structured, compulsory, on somebody else's fieldwork, and you sort of got to analyse on a data response question and maybe extended questions based on the data response question. And then there's 1 question on your physical fieldwork, 1 question on your human fieldwork, 9 marks, extended piece of writing. And the questions do vary, but you can prepare quite rigorously for those. So that's just to give you some context. I just always think that's better before we get into the details of the session today. So what I mean by smaller questions in the Unit 2 paper, something like this. So here we're quite fortunate because we've got a map and we've got data as well. So we've got a table with the different regions, the different counties in Wales. I shouldn't have said counties because it's regions, because, for example, South West Wales, which is Ceredigion, Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire, is all compiled into one. And Cardiff is also replaced with Vale of Glamorgan, and where I work in Newport is also with Monmouthshire. So yeah, regions we've got here, and we've got income per capita. So what they've done is got an average income per capita in that specific region. Now, what we'd have to do, it'd be something like this. This is from the 2017 paper, so there's not really been anything similar since. So possibly you could have something similar upcoming for you. Use figure 1 to describe the distribution of income per capita in Wales. So it's a describe question. If we see a command word that says describe, this is the assessment objective 1, which is a command, assessment objective 3, that asks us to simply just describe what we see. So use the data in the figure to describe what we see. We've also got distribution. So when we're thinking about distribution, we need to think about our map skills as well. So sort of 2 things here. We've got to describe the data, analyze the data, but we also need to see what the trends are in terms of our map skills as well. So 5-mark question. Success criteria I think of when I look at this question and this figure, I would think, well, first of all, trends. Do we see any trends here? So what's the highest that we can see here? Well, Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan. Monmouthshire and Newport is quite high as well. Swansea is quite high. So what we can see generally in the southeast, we've got our sort of concentration of our highest income per capita. So you could start off with going, overall, I can see from using the map and the data, I can see from figure 1 that the southeast has the largest concentration of income per capita. For example, and then you could say Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan with the highest income per capita at 25,300, and then Monmouthshire and Newport follow suit at £22,080. So here we need to refer to the data, we need to look at the trends. Yes, we need to use our map skills as well, like I've just done there. Largest, smallest amount, majority, use the words like concentration, see if there's any exception to the rule, like Eithriad. Can we see an exception here? Well, maybe possibly the lowest. Well, the Gwent valleys is and the central valleys are low, considering we've just made that sort of generic assumption about the south east. So some interesting points that you can raise here. So that's an example you could have if you are watching this at home and it's pre-recorded. Maybe it's a good idea if you pause the screen now and you can try this question at home. Now, what I mean by extended questions that we could have is another example from the 2017 paper. Now, I've translated an item, an answer from an excellent pupil in Gwentes Coed that has written an answer for this question that came up in 2017, which was, Examine the severity of 2 challenges facing rural communities, 8 marks. Now this comes directly from 2.1.8, which looks at challenges facing rural communities. Now, let's have a look at the answer and let's decide what's good about it. First of all, before we start that, it's important to note when we get 8-mark questions that we need to do 2 things here. Yes, assessment objective 1, which would be our geography understanding that of our geographical knowledge. That's use of facts, statistics, but also just in what we're saying, and that is correct geographical matter. And then the second thing we need to do here is assessment objective 2. Now, if you're thinking, what is he saying? Well, assessment objective 2 is when we use and I can't think of the English off the top of my head, that we use the data and we use our geographical understanding to analyse and synthesise our ideas. So here, the command word is examine. So in order to examine, what we'd have to do is say, is it positive? Is it negative? To what extent is it positive? What extent is it negative? And then you could sort of say, well, I'm going to examine the social, the economic and environmental factors of these challenges and maybe suggest which one is worse than the others. Okay, let's have a look at the answer itself, and then we'll sort of pick a sort of success criteria of what is needed in questions like this. One challenge facing rural communities is second homes, which is a serious problem because the Welsh language is declining. An example of this is areas in Pembrokeshire, such as the village of Solvach, which only has 1 woman who speaks Welsh in the whole village, and therefore a serious challenge because the Welsh language is declining in these areas and therefore destroying the culture of Wales. On the other hand, on one hand, some may argue that second home ownership is not a serious challenge due to the growth of money and economy as the population increases, where new residents spend money for local businesses. In addition, Pembrokeshire Council tax was raised to 300% for second homes, and the investment of additional taxes can have a positive effect on the council's services, and therefore it can be argued that this challenge is not too serious. An additional challenge is the provision of services. In particular, services such as post offices and banks are closing and having a staggering effect on rural and remote communities. 242 banks were closed across the UK in 2023, and many are the focal point for many residents. A lack of services means that it will be social exclusion and means there will only be provision of website for them to use banking services. In addition, it is necessary to consider how poor the internet facilities are, for example, broadband in rural areas, and therefore means that the provision of services will be worse than urban areas. On average, broadband speeds are 7.5 megabits per second, which is significantly lower than urban areas. This therefore shows that there are clear challenges for rural communities, whether it is services or the risk of second homes. So I'm going to pick apart what I like about this answer. So first of all, they do speak about just 2 challenges. They're sort of need sometimes to tell the examiner all the challenges you've remembered. You don't need to. It's asked for 2. You just do 2 in detail. So the first one that they highlight is the second homes issue. They've said that the effect of the second homes actually has a sort of negative multiplier effect on culturally, which is the Welsh language. So that's a really interesting point there, that they've said, yeah, here's the challenge, but it also has a knock-on effect. And they've given examples. So that would be assessment objective 1. Where it says Pembrokeshire, villages like Solvach, only 1 woman speaks Welsh. And if you're thinking this, reading this and thinking this person's just made it up, no, it isn't. It actually is true. We watched it in class, and it is the harsh reality of second home ownership, which does face rural communities. But I like the fact then that they've examined it, because they've said that it's a serious challenge because it's affecting Wales and the culture. However, they've also said that some may argue that it's not so serious because it does have some sort of positive effect when these new residents are spending money in local businesses. And they also raise the council tax to sort of prevent this challenge from happening. However, that's going to have a positive effect because people are still going to have to pay these sort of bills. And this will mean that the challenge is not as serious because the council now will have more money to spend on facilities and services. The second then challenge was the provision of services. It speaks about post offices and banks. What I like here is that it makes a nod to rural and remote communities. So not only does it face rural communities, but the most remote that are in Wales. And post office and banks, it discusses, yeah, as I said, 242 banks were closed across the UK in 2023. And it says here that they're the focal point of these rural areas. The residents need them. And maybe they could have added about how it actually has such a negative effect for the elderly that have always lived in these communities. That could have possibly added to sort of a social impact or social effect here. It talks about social exclusion, which is a geographical concept that we need to know for this paper. And it talks about web usage only, which obviously, again, will have a negative effect for those most elderly in our community that maybe struggle with digital literacy. You could discuss. So maybe that could have developed it slightly further. Again, a fact about broadband speed, which is quite interesting. And then there's a nice conclusion at the end. This will therefore show, and there's sort of connectives in this, in addition, therefore, because there's constant connectives here, developing points, which is what we need to see in these 8-mark questions. So I put here very detailed understanding with examples, AO2, a thorough examination of the impact and the severity as well. So an excellent piece, really, if you were able to produce this in the exam. Okay, a different question then. So here it says use figures 2A and 2B to identify changes that occurred in this industrial area of Bilbao. So here we need to think of a success criteria. Well, we need to identify. So we're purely just telling the examiner which changes have been made using the photographs that we can see here. So already there's some sort of screaming out to me here. And this is an example that you could possibly do in the exam. We can see, but before it was an area with train transport links. Now it's changed with only road transport, but has improved. For example, there are 2 roundabouts that connect different areas. We can see a development of new flats after. We can see, as a result of the regeneration, an improvement in green public areas with the presence of trees and areas to walk throughout the park. So here it does state, and it does show the changes since the regeneration. However, maybe there's not the full development of points that would get you maybe the 5 marks, but they have directly shown. Now, how we can improve this, we could say in figure 2B, we can see that is different from 2A. That's how I would develop this further. So maybe 3 or 4 marks because it doesn't actually specifically say from the figure. Okay, a data question that you could possibly have, and something like this hasn't actually come up before, and we had to look at this at 2.1.7, where we look at rebranding rural areas and why we need to rebrand rural areas. So here, question, compare the population structure of Wales and Powys County. So 5 marks here for this data analysis question. Compare is assessment objective 3, and we purely need to use the information that we see here, and we need to analyze what sort of trends. So generally, what can we see? First of all, does it follow the same pattern as Wales as does Powys? So the coloured one is Powys at both sides, and then as the sort of white mark then, or the line in some cases, is the general pattern for Wales. So for a compare question, we need to see similarities and we need to see differently. If it was contrasting, it would just be everything was different. So we need to remember as well, we can't just say, well, in Wales, there is a higher portion of the population, so I'm using terms directly from the figure, In Wales, there's a higher proportion of the percentage of the population aged 20 to 24 than there is in Powys. Okay, great, but you've not shown any data to sort of back up the point. So, for example, there's 9% in Powys compared to 13.3% overall in Wales. And remember as well, you have to calculate the female and male if you're going to do overall, or just be specific and denote what side, what gender you're going to be speaking about. So if you'd like to pause this and give this a go at home, you can, now that I've been through this, and hopefully that helps. Okay, similar to the question that I gave on the image of the regeneration, again, another regeneration question. I think is a bit of a regeneration overload. So use evidence from figure 1 to suggest how the Olympic venues could regenerate East London. So what have we got here? Well, let's have a look. So we've got the Olympic Stadium, we've got the village, where the athletes live, which is 2 over here with the flats. We've got 3, which looks like some sort of entertainment, sort of theme park, ride. 4, we've got a water centre, and 5, sort of leisure centre, I'm assuming is what that means. And number 5, we've got a broadcasting studio. So we've got 5 things that we can discuss that the figure is telling us. Now, this question says suggest. So this is assessment objective 2, even though we need to use the figure, which would be assessment objective 3. So basically, you need to directly pull points from the figure that you can see here. So how you do this, you're probably going to ask me. Well, like this. So there's an example here where it says, we can see an Olympic stadium in the middle of figure 1. This can attract visitors for sporting events throughout the year and therefore revive the perception of the area. We can see the athletes village that is reviving the area by renovating the houses to improve the quality of the houses in the area. This picture shows the orbital exceller Mittel, which shows the new entertainment while regenerating where people can come all year round to enjoy entertainment facilities all year round. Bit of repetition there. The presence of a broadcasting centre in the western corner of the picture shows that the possibility of offering a broadcasting site with the technology facilities for television and can promote more investment in the area in the arts and media fields. So what's good about this is that it's telling us directly. So the use of evidence is fantastic because it's telling us here from the middle of figure 1. Well, that's instantly telling us I've used that from figure 1. This can attract visitors for sporting events. So it's pulling out direct things from the image. It's told us we've got the Olympic Stadium here. It's going to suggest what the question is, suggest how it could regenerate the area. Well, it's going to change perceptions of the area through re-imaging and rebranding. Then the athletes village, that's reviving the area, improving that housing that was probably once there. This shows again the entertainment. Then you've got the broadcast centre over in the western northwest part of the picture. So again, using our sort of map skills, even though it's an image, you're sort of using your skills again to tell me exactly where it is. And again, discussing that as a broadcast centre. So sort of what the implications of regeneration is, well, this is going to bring more sort of investment, which maybe they could have added that investment, maybe more businesses here, maybe clustering will take place. But overall, quite a good account here and analysis of the answer. Okay, again, looking at a smaller question, use figure 2 to describe how the concentration of digital companies varies across the United Kingdom. So digital companies and clustering comes from 2.1.6, where you look at the quaternary sector. Now, again, this one is purely based on describing what we can see. So interesting to note here, we've got low and high, but there's no data for us to analyze. So we're just going to look at general patterns from the sort of colours. And if you were thinking, what is this map? What is it called? It's called a choropleth map. So the map shows the greatest concentration in England and specifically London and the countries surrounding London, the counties surrounding London. Generally, the higher concentration is in the southeast of England. The highest concentration in Wales is in Cardiff, and the lower in coastal and rural areas in Wales, for example, very low in Gwynedd. The smallest concentration is generally in the north of Scotland, the Outer Hebrides here. So what's good about this? Well, it's saying the map shows. So we're using the figure. So if you said for figure 2 shows the greatest concentration, so the greatest, fantastic. So we're using what's in the scale here. If there's some sort of key, we're using that. And we've already made a pattern. We've seen generally it's England and London more specifically, and the surrounding counties are at its highest concentration. Then discussion of Wales, what the pattern is there. You could do probably the same with Northern Ireland if you wanted, and the same with Scotland. But when we're saying also what the lowest is, I've said what the lowest is in Wales here, and also what the lowest is generally in Scotland too. So again, this is sort of what we'd expect from a sort of AS level description question like this. Okay, another question following the map, suggest how the data presentation method in figure 2 could be improved. So as I said, it's a choropleth map, and what it does succeed to do is that it does show colours, and it's one graduated colour. So I always like to think of the Dulux dog and Dulux paint, and that in order to get to our deep navy blue wall colour, that we need to start with the white, and then that would lead us to the light baby blue that would just like you can see on the screen, that would get us to the navy. So that is one positive thing that this choropleth map does do, and some choropleth maps don't, so for you to be aware of. Now, how could they improve this? Well, as I said before, there's no data, there's nothing for us data to use that says how many digital companies are in London, so there's no specific data, no statistics, and there's also no bars between this scale, so it's sort of just is one graduated color that's going from low to high. So that's something also to be aware of. So those are two things in where you can improve this in particular. Okay, let's look at another extended question then. This one is asking us to assess. It's asking us to assess the effect that the changing flow of people has on one area that you've studied. So they might actually tell you this to maybe look at analyse or evaluate a rebranding scheme in a rural area. And it will probably say in one area that you've studied. So might say one or more areas you've studied. I would stick to one in an 8-mark question because you only have a page to write the account, and with writing an examination you'll find it difficult in terms of time to be able to write more than a page anyway. So I would stick to one and do it in detail and do it properly. So here, the assessment objective 2, the command word is assess. So we're going to assess if it's positive, if it's negative, and again, what are those positives and negatives? Are they social positives? Are they economic positives? Are they environmental positives? So this person has started off well. They've told us exactly the area that they've studied. So the Uplands and Swansea are facing a number of problems as a result of studentification, I should say, due to the universities in the local area. So the changing flow of people, this is 2.1.1, and studentification is what we need to remember. So maybe your case study is completely different in your school, which is absolutely fine, but the changing flow of people, we've looked at studentification. The students have a huge impact on the local economy, environment, and people because of the times. Because of the times they're in the area and therefore spend a lot of money, but also when they do not, therefore affect the local economy. So I'm just going to start analysing it as we go along. Not really clear in terms of it's very generic and is not really sort of leading to any conclusions. One positive economic effect, okay, this is assessment, is that the students spend a lot of money in local shops, which therefore bring money into the local area. Okay, so that's development of points there. In addition, some can argue that this is a positive social impact because it generates jobs for the local area, which is going to improve the quality of life of the residents. On the other hand, a negative social effect is that the students rent houses that they only live in part-time. For example, Bryn Road has only 7 out of 95 of the houses are actually local residents. So this is good. That's showing assessment objective 1, which is geographical knowledge and understanding. Here they're telling me facts that they've remembered that show they have a good geographic understanding of the concept of studentification. This means that the local residents have fewer houses to buy due to many HMOs living part-time, which is a social effect. They could have said negative social effect. Well, maybe develop that further. What does that negative social effect mean for the local residents? Yeah, they're buying the houses, but the day-to-day issues, maybe with only having 7 permanent residents on the street, what sort of implications does that hold? In conclusion, after considering all the effects, we see an unstable influx, therefore putting a lot of stress on residents financially because the students come to the area seasonally. Well, that's a really nice point about the seasonality of it, and that's something that you should discuss when you're discussing studentification. However, I think it was just a little too late in the conclusion to bring that in. It's talking about stress to the residents financially. It doesn't actually really discuss that in the actual body itself. So avoid just putting conclusions with new ideas in, which could be a point on its own. So 5 out of 8 for this answer. I think actually hindsight should be possibly 4 out of 8. So I said a good answer with few facts and statistics, but maybe a lack of mention of what kind of negative effects they are. Are there actually any environmental ones? And what do the local residents not like? Is this sort of maybe change or perception of place possibly you could discuss, because that actually comes under this unit, the perception of place and how people perceive a place to be, and does it have negative connotations because of this influx of students. Okay, secondly then, this evening, and we've got about 15 minutes left, I shouldn't be too much longer, is the fieldwork. This is section B, and this carries the same amount of marks as the section A of the Unit 2 paper, so it's 32 marks. Now, the first question, we'll go over some questions in a second, it's just general data that they'll give you of somebody's done sort of fieldwork inquiry, and you were to answer and to sort of describe. There'll be a describe question, and maybe there'll be an extended examine question or assess question. Now, what's to remember now, important take-homes in terms of fieldwork. There's 6 stages to any inquiry, fieldwork inquiry, and it's important that you sort of bring this up in your 9-mark extended questions on the 2 fieldwork inquiry days that you'll be going on. So the planning stage is really important. Why you've picked the place, what sort of data collection methods you'll be doing. Have you come to sort of any sort of prejudged conclusions? Have you maybe thought about, I've said data collection, have you maybe thought about what sort of things you're aiming to look at? Have you done a risk assessment for the day? So that's all in your planning stage. Then you've got your data collection on the day. So you actually are going to using the data collection methods, you're going to go out in the field and you're going to find some good geography, and is what you're hoping to find going to happen through the use of those data collection methods. Thirdly then is the presenting of the data, that you'll do that in different ways in the most appropriate way to the data that you've collected. And then 4th is the interpreting and the analysis. So you've finished the day, you've presented your data, you've done your graphs, you've done your maps, whatever way, your tables, and then you're sort of interpreting the data and you're analysing it carefully. What does this actually mean? And then you'll be able to make conclusions and sort of bring you back to your sort of sub questions or your main question for your inquiry. And then finally is your evaluation. What went well, what went wrong? And if you were to do it again, what would you sort of better in this inquiry progress and process? So that's what we need to remember at all sort of level of description, is that this is sort of the core of the fieldwork inquiry. Now, what do I mean by the small first question? Well, something like this. It says, so this was from 2018, if I remember rightly, whilst conducting an investigation into the impacts of in-migration, out-migration on Aberystwyth, a student collected the secondary data below. So figure 3 here, it says migration data over time, in-migration, out-migration, and net migration. State the range of net migration of Wales between 1991 and 2013. So there you'd have to find the range. You're using your statistical skills here and your numeracy skills to find the range. So highest, take away the lowest, and that would give you your answer. But be aware there might be other numerical skills that you will need to remember. I remember last year's paper, there was a question on what stat test you would use, and it was Spearman's rank, which is really difficult, which you'd always use when there's a he's better than us, and I can't think of the English word, when there's a positive correlation or a negative correlation on your data set. So just be aware there are numerical skills that you need to know, and if you need more assistance on this, please ask your teacher. And also there is work in the textbooks. Now, second question, use figure 3 to identify trends in the migration data in 1991 and 2013. So what sort of trends do you see in the in-migration, out-migration, and generally the net migration? Are there any patterns that you see in particular here? So here, straight from the country marker, from the marking advice that we get, and it says here that generally migration has seen a sort of out migration has increased. On the whole, there's more migration coming in than there's been out, but only between 1991 and 1993 there was a negative net migration, so that's important to know. So again, you're looking at trends, and then they give you an extra mark then for the use of data, for you saying what year and how much. So be aware that you're going to have something like that. Then that you'll have something that will develop on this. So it says assess the strengths and weaknesses of this secondary data collected by the students. So it says here statswales.gov.uk. So you would sort of give, what are the strengths? So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using secondary data, and that secondary data in particular. So for example, maybe you're thinking of reliable sources available, maybe it's actually hard to find and secure in the first place. And then the second question then is name and justify a suitable graphical technique that you could use. Now, please be aware of the different graphs and data presentation methods that you could use. I think it is good to consult your teacher on this. Here, what can we see? Well, we've got time, and if anything is over time, I would suggest using a line graph, because we've got something over time which would go on our bottom axis, and then we've got migration in and out and net. So we could have 3 lines then. So you've got migration in numbers, in and out, and net on 3 different lines over time. But you could equally do a compound bar graph with them in bars, the in, the out, and the net of each year. So it's up to you there, and you would have to justify your choice why that was the most appropriate. Okay, this was the from the marking scheme that says exactly what you would need to do. So if you want to try those questions at home, you can. Okay, different question then in terms of a fieldwork investigation. Again, same sort of thing. What they're going to ask you straight away is this is some sort of example. This is figure 3, and this looks at somebody's done a fieldwork study on loss of vegetation on footpaths in national parks, and they've looked at over distance and the depth of the path, and they can see if there's any erosion that's been onto the vegetation. Again, questions here, identify 2 potential risks facing students in this fieldwork. Again, risk assessment is something you need to be aware of. Marking scheme here says maybe slipping, tripping whilst you're doing this, that you might get rashes or stings from the vegetation, maybe you get insects, maybe you get a sunburn, you could get hypothermia, you might get lost whilst doing this. So just be aware, any sort of fieldwork, there are risks to doing them, and you should be aware of them. For one of the risks identified above, state how this could be reduced. Again, So if you said about footwear, well, you could say that you could use appropriate footwear, and that you're aware of sort of your surroundings. Maybe if you said about the sunburn, that you could wear sunscreen, possibly. Up to you. And then here, suitable graphical technique. Well, for me, I can see here we've got the distance and we've got depth. So we would use a cross-section graph that would sort of over the distance, and then it would be able to show us the depth of the vegetation loss. Okay, be aware you could get a question based on your planning stages, and I'm going to show you something now. So what do we do in the planning stages? Well, we get a research question, we get sub questions to investigate, and maybe we've done some research on sort of the area that we're going to look at and sort of why we're going to look at that area. We're going to set a prediction of what we expect to see that we're going to happen, and we're going to finalize a time and transport of when we're going to do it. I've given Cardiff as an example here. Maybe you're going to have a look at areas. You've looked at retail, using a map, what sort of areas we're going to go to. We need to know data collection methods, maybe sampling methods, gather some sort of tools together, what we need on the day, what resources we need, and also we need a risk assessment. So, question you can have: evaluate 2 decisions made when planning your fieldwork investigation in physical geography. So different to the human that I've just shown you. So things you could discuss in this 9-mark question. So it's asking us to evaluate. So when we see evaluate, we just need to think advantages and disadvantages and we discuss it for 2 decisions made when planning your fieldwork. So just like I said, the planning stage, that's what we need. So the before you actually did your physical geography. Now with this question, you'll have to do 1 in physical geography, 1 in human geography. The questions can change, and there could be something on the planning, there could be something on any level of your the fieldwork inquiry. So it could be on your planning stage, like we've just had, your data collection. It could be on the presenting the data, interpreting the data. What were your conclusions? So it can literally ask you, what did you find from your physical geography fieldwork? And you'd have to say your findings. You'd have to remember facts and stats that you found on the day, and why they were important, your conclusions, what conclusions you made, and maybe evaluate what went well, what didn't go so well on the fieldwork. So here, for example, was the location suitable? Yes. Why was it? What could we go there in a day? Did we spend enough time planning and researching the area? Did we need to do some more background research on maybe other suitable locations? Did we choose enough features to measure? Sites we collect, was there enough? Was the sampling strategy appropriate? Did it work effectively? The risk assessment, was it suitable? What would we have changed maybe next time? Was the equipment adequate? And were there any possible problems? So that's what you could have discussed. And now make sure with this, don't just discuss generically advantages, disadvantages of general decision-making process. It needs to be specific about what you saw on the day. So please, 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 the best answers that we see are ones that where you actually give us details and we feel like we were there with you when we did that fieldwork experiment, because you've given us data, you've given us examples, and don't just make generic statements, be specific. Now, here's another example. Evaluate 2 data collection methods that have been used in fieldwork investigation, physical geography, 9 marks. Now, the first thing you have to do is give your title of what was your key question that you came up with, maybe as a class for your fieldwork inquiry. So here it was, how and why do the moraines of Llyn Fan Fas and Fan Bulchwyth in Brecon Beacons vary? So here, one method of data collection is photos. I use the Stitch app to take a picture. So one advantage is that we can annotate the pictures to find out further details. One weakness is that the app field has not worked for everyone and they depended on other people. Another strength of this method is that it's easy to do. With the majority of people, they can just download it. A majority of people have a smartphone. Another weakness is that people get different photos because they've taken photos from a different angle. Another strength is that nothing depends if a person is good at sketching. Another data collection method we used was Britice website. One weakness is that the secondary data, therefore, was less reliable because we have not collected the data ourselves. The strength of this method is that we can find the area, the angle, the rear wall of the moraine, and the data is very appropriate. Another advantage is that if everyone uses the website, everyone will get the same statistics, so it is reliable. Also, when using Britice, we use a clinometer on the day to measure the angle and direction of the back wall. But one weakness is that people are of different heights and therefore produce different results. So they've used another data collection method. That's the third one. So really, that's inappropriate for the question because we only wanted two. So they have discussed the two methods in this, which is positive. They were quite a lot of short statements. I don't feel like I was with them on this fieldwork study. They didn't really give me specific examples. It got better in the second half when it spoke about Brit dice. But what did you actually, how did it help you find, how did those data collection methods, what were the strengths in actually helping you find that information? I'm sort of unaware. It didn't really tell me in this answer. So maybe 5 out of 9, maybe. I would actually possibly think 4 now in hindsight. Detailed evaluation of the both methods, but they were unclear in areas. Lacks detail of evaluating the use of photos, that was unclear, and a note at the end which is unclear and didn't connect with the work of Brit Ice, the website Brit Ice, which is very interesting. As a side note, if you are doing glaciated landscapes, it's a great website to research and have a look at some really interesting landscapes. Well, that is it for the session today. So diolch yn fawr iawn. If you have any questions regarding anything that I've discussed this evening, please feel free to get in touch. There's my hub email and my work email there. If I can be of any help, please get in touch. As I said, the resources for this session obviously is on the e-sgol Cadwlan Cymru website, along with the previous Geography AS session that I've done. The PowerPoint slides will be available for those. There's questions in there as well in the previous session, and there's also previous geography sessions by other people that are great also to help you revise for the summer exams. So diolch yn fawr a pob lwc.